an important project that Navjyoti initiated started in late 1980s. Formally, it worked during the first half of the 1990s. The project was called Foundation and Methodology of Traditional Theoretical Sciences in Indian Tradition. So, to understand the genesis of this project first, how sort of these ideas arose. Basically, from 80s, this PPST group has been thinking of the science and technology, studies, research, practice, understanding of science and technology in India, and it had sort of arrived at a position that we need a new stream of science and technology in India. From this we have to move on. Firstly, because it's non-functional both from the practical point of view of trying to satisfy the aspirations and needs of our people and our country. It does not contribute significantly to what is considered science and technology activity all over the world, that there is a certain lack of focus and creativity, and mainly because it has gotten disconnected from the roots of creativity of such activities in our own civilization. Secondly, because since it does not have our own civilizational background to reflect upon, it therefore is constantly looking outwards to have a reflective understanding of science and technology. We therefore are followers and end up creating these footnotes in the world of science and technology. So these were the issues that bothered us in the 80s. And so we said that we have to create a new stream which relates itself to the science and technology activity in our own civilization, in our own past, which relates itself to the contemporary needs of Indian society. And so it evaluates itself all the time. And thirdly, it functions as a national scientific activity, that we have communities which actively discuss, debate what we should be doing, what we have done, and what has been done earlier, what others are doing, from that kind of a perspective. So we ran a bulletin, we went and created various groups all around, we held some annual conferences. We were greatly inspired by the work of Dharampalji on Indian society in 18th century, how India functioned, and his understanding of how our current Indian society is sort of split between the ordinary people and the elite, and this link has to be re-established. It's as much the job of the elite to re-link themselves to this society as of this rest of our society to draw this elite in, make them do whatever is essential for this. So this bulletin ran for about 15 years, about 20-25 issues came out. I think Ashok has put all of them on the web. During the course of this, various discussions went on. And one crucial thing was, how do we understand the various scientific traditions of India? What is the current understanding? How does it link to the same sort of disciplines as they are studied and researched upon today? Is there any relevance at all? Or has the way we are thinking about most of the disciplines in sciences, as they originated in last 2 or 3 centuries ago in Europe, have they sort of surpassed everything else that have been done earlier or have been done by others? And so there is no need for us to look at this except as for the purposes of documentation, that if we want to sort of say how mathematics developed, it is true that the sign function came from India, or the decimal place value system came from India, or perhaps zero also came from India, many other things. So there is some documentation that is needed when we recount the development of a subject. And clearly, even in 1980s, the world had moved to a different understanding of science and technology. The narrative that was there earlier, that some 2000 years ago, for 5-6 centuries. And so most of books that were available, scholarly literature, and most of the articles in international journals had this kind of a viewpoint till 1950s, 60s. And most of these narratives were originated in late 18th and early 19th century. And this has been what we are perhaps, we are very late, and we continue to sort of feed our students with this. And so most youngsters come and say, I am interested to know what was done, what is there. So because when we look at whatever is there in books or popular literature, we do not see any understanding which is different. But whatever where much of the world today understands, there is no such of the information base on which the Greek mathematics or Greek astronomy or Greek medicine was constructed. Much of the corpus was from the Egyptians and Babylonians, and perhaps from others, we don't know. And they were the Chinese. And then for the period when Europe thought itself, or at least Europe in 19th century thought was the Dark Ages, between 5th century and 16th, 17th century, there was no dearth of science or technology in most of the world outside of Europe. The Indians and Chinese were practicing very robust science and technology activities. And so did people in West Asia or North Africa, the Islamic civilization. And till about mid-18th century, even in terms of a robust social economic formation, it was India and China which produced most of the manufactured goods in the world. They produced, it's now estimated, around 50-60% of global manufacture, and consequently 50-60% of global economy was centered around India. And so today, most people outside India, most scholars who know about these things, do not have this confusion that there is some simple trajectory of science or technology. And the same thing will hold for all other disciplines about theory of aesthetics or art or music. Or so this would be that till about 18th century, there were various traditions of thought and traditions of practice, and they were institutionalized, and they were integrated with society. And what has happened in the post-18th century, most regions of the world are trying to come to terms with it in recreating their own version of, their own modern version of knowledge. And in that, India, which was a major contributor prior to 18th century, is expected to participate in a very active way. But somehow we Indians are caught in lots of debates, lots of doubts, lots of arguments, but none of these arguments are taken seriously enough. It's not that one view is correct, another view is wrong. But the people who present one point of view do not take it seriously enough to pursue it, to do as much work on it as possible, to convince as many people on that as possible, and take it to the next level so that the issues they are raising lead to some understanding, some better understanding on which others can then build upon. So the effort of PPSC was trying to do all this. In theoretical sciences, Navjyoti started thinking about the foundations of logic, linguistics, mathematics in India. He wrote a very important paper in 1984, which was published in the NISTAD's conference, one of the. And then he wrote some sort of a early version of his project, which was published in the PPSD Bulletin in 1985, where basically in the end he is trying to conclude. This paper was on development of mathematics in Greece, India, medieval Europe, in modern Europe, India and China. And in the end, he tried to point out that there were different mathematical traditions. And while we know much about the mathematical tradition of India, we do not happen to know much about, or perhaps anything at all serious about, what were the foundational methodologies of mathematics in India? What is the philosophy of mathematics? What was the idea of justification of mathematical results? What is the understanding of the nature of objects dealt with in mathematics? And how mathematics related itself to other disciplines? Was mathematics the queen of sciences as it was in Greece? Or was philosophy closely linked with mathematics as it was in European tradition? So all these issues, the way Indian mathematical tradition developed, seem to have been different, but we do not have serious scholarly reflection on it. Second, the mathematics discipline, as it has evolved in 20th centuries, there are so many foundational questions which research mathematicians of contemporary times are discussing, and often their discussions have seemed to be fairly limited because it is based upon a certain set of philosophical presuppositions which are inherent to the way mathematics has developed in modern Europe. And unless one gets out of those philosophical presuppositions, many of these foundational issues will not get appropriately resolved. And thirdly, merely understanding mathematics or logic or linguistics or psychology as developed in India as a set of rules, as a set of propositions, as a set of procedures will not do. We have to understand how those ideas originated. We have to understand how those ideas were debated, and we have to understand how they were applied in various contexts. And so, unless we understand these disciplines in their totality, not merely as some pegs hanging in the course of development of mathematics as it developed in the world over. So there has to be a narrative of Indian science in itself, as distinct from a narrative of science in general. Ultimately, you can still try and match them together, you can sort of put them together, but when you say you have a tradition of science, it builds on itself. The text that they read, the sort of scheme of thought to which they belong, so that is a tradition in itself. Not that all traditions are isolated. In fact, very, very major ideas they borrow from others. But when they borrow, the way they internalize, it depends at various circumstances. Say the Indian decimal place value system was taken over by Arabs and then by the Europeans. But they have been internalized into their own mathematical scheme. So like that, one can go and discuss this. So the question of foundations was not merely one of some philosophical ideas alone. The question of foundations was the entire constitution of this tradition. And so there were many components of this project. There was a component of mathematics and astronomy, mainly trying to study the way results were justified in mathematics, mainly trying to study the way the approach of Indians in mathematics was what can be called as algorithmic, that it does not focus upon established results. It focuses upon established procedures of calculation or procedures of doing things. The way Indian astronomical computations were made, what was the kind of basis on which they were made, how these ideas developed in India, and whether ultimately whether one can think of some contemporary applications for all of this. So it was around these set of ideas in mathematics and astronomy. About 3-4 projects were taken. One with a very elderly scholar called Professor K.V. Sharma, one with Professor Sriram, something with me, Dr. Krishnan, Professor Krishnan and Professor Junjunwala. So there were a scheme of projects like this. Then already in IIT Kanpur, a group had nucleated. They were doing a course on Pan-Indian linguistics for computer science students. They were trying to see whether in the contemporary applications of natural language processing, some creative inputs can be obtained through the methodology of Indian linguists and Indian logicians, Professor Rajiv Sangal, the Karnik, then Professor Patnaik, then Vineet Chaitanya, who was earlier in Jabalpur and had then went to Kanpur after taking Diksha in the Chinmaya mission. So this group was to look into making a computational model of Ashtadhyayi, to look at the languages of Navya Nyaya and see how they can be sort of source for doing better ways of knowledge representation in artificial intelligence, and various issues around logic and linguistics. Navjyoti himself also was keen on looking at some of these issues. Then there were some of the mentors of Navjyoti in philosophy in Calcutta, Professor Mukhopadhyay, Professor Saha, and the main evolution of Nyaya in India had one cornerstone around 13th, 14th century in the text called Tattva Chintamani, Gangesh Mukhopadhyay. And lot of discussions in Navya Nyaya till about late 17th century were in the form of commentaries to Tattva Chintamani, and lot of discussion in other schools of philosophy such as Mimamsa and Navya Vyakarana were in the context of the debates that the Navya Nyaya scholars had generated. And so one was the thing is to try and see the basic structure of Tattva Chintamani itself and look at all the debates on the understanding of language, philosophy of language, philosophy of linguistics, philosophy of grammar that had developed around Navya Nyaya till 17th, 18th century. In fact, I think in 1800, when the British go to Navadvip, they find about 1,000 students there. In 1791, there's an article. About 1,000 students were there and about 150 teachers were there. And William Jones writes a letter saying, this is the third university I am seeing. And the report that this article is giving refers to an earlier period, 100 years earlier, when there were perhaps 4,000 students and about 500 experts in this Navadvip University. Anyway. And lastly, there was a dimension of cognitive science and epistemology of science, where the Jaina theory, where the theories of Tantra Yukti, of theory formation and how a theoretical text is to be written, and Indian understanding of the Pramana Shastras in relation to science. All these kinds of ideas were integrated together. So this was a proposal which got nucleated between 86 and 88. There were half a dozen conferences, some of which Navjyoti himself organized, some of which all of us went, wherever there was any discussion related to this. That is where he gathered more people, more information. And the situation was such that the government of India was willing to grant a project on this, a coordinated project. Again, Navjyoti would go and meet the DST secretary, then he will go and meet some other professor. So he will see to it that nobody could say that this is unreasonable, nobody could say that this cannot be done. People could only say, but I would like you to do it this way, or I would sort of, what will you produce at the end? So the usual questions. So the project was formulated and started and functioned between 91 to 93. Instead of recounting what actually came out in terms of the project report, I will tell you what it nucleated, what this kind of an idea led to. This was not the only project that PPSC was involved with. There was another very important project at this time on trying to see whether we can produce an alternative curriculum and alternative kind of textbooks based upon the kind of view that PPSC was having. The last point I have to say is both these projects still are projects, in the sense that whatever was aimed in this project was not something that a small group, even of 15, even 18 scholars from 11 institutions could complete. And the same thing with our educational curriculum or textbooks, they remain. So in that sense, this discussion is very relevant, is not merely recounting the way things developed 30 years ago or 25 years ago. The understanding of Indian mathematics that we have today is much more sort of robust, much more all-rounded than it was 30 years ago. The problem was serious scholars of India had not engaged themselves with the study of Indian mathematical tradition in the especially in the post-independence era. In the pre-independence era, it was an activity in which various learned people in this country tried to contribute in their own way to the understanding of our tradition in various disciplines. And in fact, in many areas what they did, like what P.V. Kane, he was an advocate or something like that, what he did in Dharma Shastra, we have not been able to surpass it even today. But in the post-independence era, mathematics was still one discipline on which there were groups that were constituted much prior to PPST. There was the Indian National Science Academy, mainly due to the effort of one professor in Calcutta called Professor S.N. Sen, and later on a couple of others. They started a journal called Indian Journal of History of Science, in which many scholarly articles on astronomy mathematics did get published. And around mid-70s, late 70s, there is Professor R.C. Gupta, who started the Indian Society for History of Mathematics, and they started a journal called Ganita Bharati. In fact, mathematics and astronomy are amongst the few disciplines their serious scholarly work can be reported in journals published in India. This may not be so, for instance, for architecture. This may not be so, for instance, for psychology. This, I mean, one can go on. This will not be so for chemistry. But what came out from this group and from the activities of various people in the last 30-40 years is that one could now trace in period most of the manuscripts, most of the texts have been either not looked into, not published, or have been wrongly understood because they were sort of studied by European Indologists in 19th century in a very peculiar manner. Their chronology has been distorted, their meanings have been distorted. Similarly, after 12th century, when this scientific activity in India sort of could not be carried on a pan-Indian basis, various regions of India came under political turmoil in different ways. How this Indian tradition of knowledge in different disciplines, how did it develop? And this is the period on which lot of documentation exists, large number of manuscripts exist, but they were all discarded as saying they contain nothing new except repeating what the old books said. And so for this reason, one would not look at it, and some of them would be in regional languages. More than in regional languages, they would be in regional scripts. Sanskrit in India is written in if you want to know a 19th century Sanskrit work in Orissa, you have to know the Oriya script. If you want to know an 18th century Sanskrit work in Kerala, you have to know the Malayalam script. And so the sort of general Sanskrit pandits that we have, whose script knowledge will be limited. So this would not be looked into, and it's very difficult to, it's not an easy exercise, we don't train anybody in this. But today we are in a position to say, at least the gaps are not there in the way they were earlier, and we can present a view of Indian mathematics, and largely it is due to work of people like K.V. Sharma, whose centenary we are going to celebrate this year. One Professor K.S. Shukla, who was a professor of mathematics in Lucknow University, and he had an opportunity to study with Avadhesh Narayan Singh, who worked with Vibhuti Bhushan Datta to write the most monumental book on history of Indian mathematics in 1930s. So Professor Shukla devoted his entire life, his centenary is being sort of conducted now. There's one lady called Saraswati Amma from Kerala. She completed her masters in Sanskrit and went to Professor Raghavan and said, I want to do PhD. he said, what have you studied in India? He said, I have studied some mathematics. So why don't you study something about mathematics in Sanskrit? She wrote a very important book called Geometry in Ancient India. This was published in late 1970s. Her centenary is coming. I mean, I am recounting all this to show that there is a lot to build upon, but there is a lot more to do. And projects like what Navjyoti initiated gave rise to many new sort of avenues. Many new scholars, Professor Amba Kulkarni is one of them, Professor Ram Subramanian is one of them. I can go on counting many more other names. And but there were only few such projects. And the situation today is also very similar. There are only few such projects. The situation about passing on this, one is to consolidate and have an overall picture in any discipline as to what it was about. That situation perhaps is better. If somebody wants to do, it is possible. But that consolidated knowledge is not available to all our youngsters today. I cannot say that here is a book you read or here is a website you see. These are still very indicative. If you want to be a scholar in this area, I can give you a lot of articles. But if as a general interested person who knows something about the theory of Bharatanatyam but want to know something about the philosophy of mathematics in India, only you have to go and converse with people like Navjyoti. You will not find a literature that you can easily build upon. So our situation is not much better today than it was 40 years ago, 35 years ago. But these kinds of things are very important, and if we do not cherish that kind of an effort and become cynical about merely saying, oh, they tried, what happened, then nothing will happen in this country. Or nothing will happen with people like us in this country. There will be many others who will still dare to do much more than what projects can give them or what immediate opportunities can give them. I will stop here. I will request Professor Amba Kulkarni to tell you something about linguistics. Then Professor Sriram will tell you something about linguistics and logic, and Professor Sriram will tell you something. Then we will have some brief discussion, and maybe in the end I will say a few more comments if need be. Thank you.